He told me he was 28, but the truth is shocking. I had believed him without question. From the very beginning, he carried himself with confidence, with a quiet charm that made me feel secure. His words, his actions, his presence, everything aligned with the story he told. I trusted him. I loved him. I imagined a future with him. And then, one day, I discovered the truth. A truth that shook the very foundation of our relationship. It was not just a simple mistake or a minor omission. It was a deliberate lie. A choice he made to hide something so fundamental about himself, something that changed everything I thought I knew. I stood there, staring at the evidence, feeling my breath catch in my throat. My heart raced. My thoughts spiraled. Questions flooded my mind. How long had he been lying? What else had he kept from me? Was any part of our relationship real? Now, I find myself at a crossroads. The man I thought I knew is not the man standing beside me. The trust is broken. The future feels uncertain. And I must make a decision. Should I try to forgive him, or should I walk away? We met on a rainy Thursday afternoon in early spring. I had ducked into a quiet bookstore cafe to escape the drizzle, hoping to lose myself in a good novel and a warm drink. He was already there, seated at a corner table with a coffee and a leather-bound journal open in front of him. Our eyes met briefly as I walked in, and there was something about his presence that felt calm, grounded, and strangely familiar. It was not the kind of instant connection one reads about in romantic novels, but it was real, subtle, warm, and comforting. He struck up a conversation when I passed by his table to look at a shelf nearby. He made a clever remark about the book in my hand, and before I realized it, we were talking like old friends. There was something about him that immediately drew me in. He had an easy confidence, not arrogant, just self-assured in a way that made me feel safe. He said his name was Marcus. He told me he was 28 and worked in creative marketing. I was 26 at the time, trying to establish myself in my career, and his age felt perfect. Close enough to understand my world, but with just enough life experience to make him seem dependable and grounded. Over the next few weeks, we spent more and more time together. He planned our dates with care, choosing places with character and charm. He listened closely, remembered small details, and had this gentle way of making me feel seen. He spoke about his passions, his goals, his childhood, and his dreams in a way that made me believe he was someone who truly understood the value of time and effort. I admired how he seemed to have a clear vision for his life. He talked about wanting a family someday, about saving for a home, and about finding someone he could build a future with. I felt like I had found someone who shared my values and my pace. When I introduced him to my friends, they were impressed. My closest friend, Lena, pulled me aside after the third time she had met him and said, "He really seems like a grown man. He is not playing games." That meant something to me. I had dated people in the past who were uncertain, inconsistent, or emotionally unavailable. With Marcus, everything felt steady. My family was equally charmed. My mother said he had kind eyes, and my father appreciated how respectfully he spoke. Nobody questioned his age. There was no reason to. He looked the part, carried himself well, and matched the phase of life we were all in. There were moments, though, that lingered in the back of my mind. Not loud enough to raise alarms, but quiet enough to cause a flicker of doubt. Once, when we were watching an old movie together, he made a comment about remembering when it first came out. I laughed and said, "You were barely a teenager then, right?" He smiled and nodded but seemed slightly off, as if he were trying to think through a response before saying it aloud. Another time, we were at dinner with a few of his friends, and someone jokingly mentioned a high school reunion. I noticed a strange glance pass between Marcus and his friend, just for a second, but it stayed with me. Still, I dismissed it. We all have odd moments and memories that catch us off guard. We continued to grow closer. He started staying over more often. We went grocery shopping together, discussed household routines, and even began talking seriously about moving in together. Our lives were blending seamlessly, and I felt like we were building something real. I pictured our future, the trips we would take, the holidays we would host, the home we would share. I thought about what our children might look like, how we would navigate challenges, and how our lives would intertwine more deeply with time. I was sure of him. I believed in us. He never acted immature or reckless. He was calm in disagreements, thoughtful in discussions, and generous with his time. He never gave me a reason to doubt his maturity. That was what made his stated age of 28 seem so fitting. It explained his stable attitude, his emotional intelligence, and his outlook on life. I was so focused on the emotional connection we had and the future we were building that I never stopped to ask whether he had been completely honest about who he was. Looking back, I can see that there were signs. Not glaring ones, but subtle inconsistencies that, together, could have formed a bigger picture if I had allowed myself to look more closely. He rarely talked about specific years or timelines. If I asked about his university days, he would give me general responses. If I mentioned cultural events or trends that defined certain years, he sometimes gave vague reactions. I thought he just did not care about those kinds of details. I did not imagine he might be hiding something as basic as his age. But in those early months, everything felt right. We laughed often, communicated well, and supported each other's goals. He was attentive without being overbearing, independent yet affectionate. I felt like I had finally found someone who not only understood me but respected me in a way that went beyond words. I was happy, and I had no reason to dig deeper. The trust was there. The love was there. And I had no idea that the foundation of our relationship was already compromised. If someone had told me then that this man I loved, this man who seemed so completely aligned with who I was and what I wanted, had lied to me about something so essential, I would have defended him. I would have said there must be a misunderstanding. That was the power of how genuine he seemed. That was the strength of the illusion. I believed in him wholeheartedly, never imagining that I would soon be standing on the edge of a truth that would change everything. The first real crack in the image of Marcus appeared on a quiet evening at home. We had just finished dinner, a simple meal I had made after work, and we were lounging on the couch, scrolling through a movie list. One of the titles sparked a memory for me, a childhood favorite, and I turned to him with a smile and said, "You must have been in high school when this came out." He paused for a moment, his expression unreadable, and then responded with a vague, "Something like that." I laughed it off, not thinking much of it at the time. But later, when I looked up the release year of the movie and did the math in my head, something did not add up. It was not a huge discrepancy, but it was enough to catch my attention. That moment planted a seed of curiosity. After that, I started to notice how often Marcus avoided talking about his past in any concrete terms. He would share stories about growing up, but they were always broad, never rooted in specific years or places. He talked about his friends, his family, and his work, but the timelines never felt grounded. Whenever I asked questions about his college experience, what he studied, when he graduated, he gave short answers, always steering the conversation toward something else. I found it strange, but I reasoned that not everyone liked to dwell on the past. Still, it continued to happen. One night we were at a friend's birthday party, surrounded by people our age, all chatting and sharing stories about university days and first jobs. Someone asked Marcus about his first job out of college. He gave a charming response, one that made everyone laugh, but it lacked details. After the party, I asked him privately what that job had actually been. He smiled and said, "Just a silly temp thing, not worth remembering," and then kissed my forehead and changed the subject. His career timeline began to feel unusually fluid. He had told me he worked in creative marketing, and from what I had seen, he was good at it. He had clients, took meetings, and even showed me some of his designs. But whenever I asked how he got started, where he interned, or which companies he worked for before freelancing, his answers were inconsistent. One day he would say he had been freelancing for 5 years, and another time he would mention starting just 2 years ago. When I pressed gently, he would smile and say, "I have done a bit of everything," and leave it at that. Beyond the stories and timelines, it was his behavior that began to feel slightly out of sync with the man I thought I knew. There were moments when he would get unusually excited about things that felt more aligned with someone younger. He spent hours playing online games with a group of friends I had never met, often laughing and shouting into his headset like a teenager. It did not bother me at first. Everyone has hobbies. But when I asked about those friends, he was vague. He said they were just online buddies, and that I would not know them. He never invited them over, never shared their names. Socially, he sometimes seemed out of place among my friends. While he was charming in small groups, there were times when his references or reactions felt more like those of someone younger trying to keep up with older peers. During a dinner with my colleagues, he mispronounced the name of a well-known executive and then tried to joke about it, brushing it off quickly. It was not a big mistake, but his defensiveness afterward made it stand out more than it should have. He laughed too loudly at jokes that were only mildly funny, and occasionally made pop culture references that did not fit his supposed age group. I tried not to let those things bother me. I reminded myself that everyone has quirks. But the small doubts began to build, piece by piece. I started paying more attention to the things he did not say, the pauses in his speech, the quick changes in subject. I noticed how often he used general terms, a while back, some years ago, when I was younger, instead of specific dates. I began replaying past conversations in my mind, trying to see what I might have missed. One day, while we were sitting together on the porch sipping coffee, I decided to ask him directly about his high school. I phrased it casually, just wanting to know where he had gone, whether he had liked it. He looked away for a moment and said, "It was not really a great time in my life." Then he quickly asked me a question about my work. The way he dodged the topic was not abrupt, but it was deliberate. I felt it. Later that week, I asked to see some of his old photos, the kind people keep from school or college. He said he had lost most of them when he moved years ago. I found that strange, but I did not push. The more I inquired, the more he closed off. Any attempt to talk about his past met a wall of vague responses or deflection. One night, when I brought it up gently again, he grew defensive. He said, "Why does it matter so much to you? You know who I am now. Why keep digging?" His tone was not angry, but it was guarded, and that was when I realized he was hiding something. Suspicion started to grow in me like a slow-burning fire. I did not want to believe that the man I loved, the man I trusted, was being dishonest. But I could not deny the feeling anymore. Something was wrong. The math did not add up. The stories had holes. The timeline was inconsistent. And worst of all, he was becoming someone I could no longer fully reach. I began to question everything. How old was he really? What else had he not told me? And why would someone lie about something so basic unless there was more they were trying to keep hidden? At first, I blamed myself. I wondered if I was being paranoid, if I was searching for flaws where none existed. But the more I tried to ignore the signs, the clearer they became. His reluctance, his defensiveness, his vague stories. None of it felt like coincidence anymore. It felt like control. It felt like fear. It felt like a man carefully managing a version of himself that he wanted me to believe in. And I did believe. For a long time, I held on to that belief, clinging to the man I thought I knew. But deep down, something inside me had begun to shift. The trust, once solid and unquestioning, had started to erode. Each unanswered question, each carefully dodged topic, added weight to the growing doubt. I was no longer sure who I was in love with. And I was beginning to realize that the truth, whatever it was, might be far more painful than the lies I had already uncovered. It happened on a Saturday afternoon, one of those quiet, ordinary days that seem designed to give you a false sense of peace before everything shatters. Marcus had gone out to run some errands, and I decided to do a bit of cleaning around the apartment. The kind of cleaning where you open drawers and sort through forgotten paperwork, trying to bring a little order to the chaos. I was reorganizing a small drawer in our bedroom that had become a catch-all for keys, receipts, and random items we did not use often. As I reached toward the back, my hand brushed against something stiff, an envelope. It was not sealed, but it was tucked away so intentionally that I hesitated before opening it. Curiosity, however, overpowered hesitation. I slid the contents out and saw what looked like a copy of Marcus's driver's license. My eyes went to the photo first. Yes, it was him. Then I glanced at the birth date. I read it once, then again, thinking I must have misread it. But it was there, clear and undeniable. He had not been born in the year he told me. Not even close. Marcus had said he was 28. He had repeated it many times in different contexts, never once stumbling. The birth date on the license said he was 35. 35. 7 years older than what he had claimed. My hands trembled as I held the card. The room felt colder. Everything around me blurred as my mind raced to process the lie I had just uncovered. He had added years to his past like bricks to a wall, and I had never noticed the cracks until now. I sat down on the bed, my heart pounding. Questions began crashing through my mind like waves in a storm. Why would he lie about something so fundamental? What else had he hidden from me? Had our entire relationship been built on fiction? I tried to think back to every moment that now seemed suspicious, every vague story, every casual dodge. The movie release date, the missing school photos, the avoidance of high school memories, the inconsistencies in his career. They all made sense now. He had not simply been avoiding personal details. He had been crafting a new identity, one that aligned more closely with my life and age. I was 30. He knew that when we met. And by saying he was 28, he had positioned himself as someone right in my world, someone with a similar timeline, similar aspirations. Anger began to rise in me, hot and bitter. I felt foolish. I had trusted him. I had defended him when others questioned the gaps in his stories. I had built a life with a man who had created a version of himself to fit what he thought I wanted. And maybe I had wanted it too badly. Maybe I had been so eager to find someone who felt right that I ignored my own instincts. When Marcus returned, I was still sitting on the bed with the license in my hand. He walked in carrying groceries, smiling like everything was normal. I looked at him, my expression frozen, and he paused. His smile faded. He saw the card in my hand, and he knew. He did not deny it. He did not even try. He sat down across from me, letting out a long breath. His voice was quiet when he spoke. I was going to tell you, he said. I did not know how. And the longer I waited, the harder it got. I stared at him, barely able to find words. You told me you were 28. We talked about our futures. You knew my plans. You matched them. You made me believe we were on the same timeline. I know, he said, and he looked genuinely ashamed. When we met, I thought it would be a one-time thing. I did not expect it to go anywhere. But then I really liked you. I wanted to keep seeing you. And I could tell that if I told you I was 35, you might not have given me a chance. You do not get to decide that for me, I snapped, my voice trembling. You took that choice away from me. He nodded, his hands clasped tightly together. I panicked. You were younger, vibrant, smart. I thought I would lose you if you knew the truth. I stood up, pacing the room as I tried to hold back the storm inside me. So you lied. Repeatedly. You looked me in the eye and lied, not just once, but over and over again. You built a life with me on a lie. I know, he said again. But everything else, everything real between us, that was true. I love you. That part is real. I shook my head. How can I believe that? How can I believe anything you have said when you were willing to lie about something so simple, so basic? He looked desperate then, his eyes wet with emotion. Please, do not throw this away. I made a mistake. A huge one. But I did it because I was afraid of losing you. I should have come clean. I should have told you the truth a long time ago. But I was scared. The pain in my chest grew heavier with every word. So you thought lying was better? You thought that building a fake version of yourself would somehow end well? Did you ever think about what would happen if I found out? He lowered his eyes. Every day. There was a silence between us, thick and suffocating. I tried to imagine what else he might have lied about. If he could lie so effortlessly about his age, what else had he hidden? Had he really worked where he said he did? Was his family even who he said they were? Had any of it been real? I felt like I was standing at the edge of a cliff, staring down into something I could not name. The man I had loved, the man I thought I knew, had become a stranger in a matter of moments. I wanted to believe that his feelings were real, that his love had been genuine. But I could not untangle the truth from the lies. I could not separate the man he pretended to be from the man he actually was. And worst of all, I could not shake the feeling that I had been chosen not for who I was, but for how well I fit into the life he wanted to create. A life that required deception to exist. Marcus reached for my hand, but I stepped back. I needed space. I needed time. I needed to understand what this meant for everything we had built. The discovery of that small card, that simple piece of plastic, had ripped open a truth that could not be ignored. And I knew that no matter how much I wanted to go back to the version of us that had felt so perfect, that version had never really existed. It was a hard truth, but it was the only one I had. The days that followed the discovery were some of the longest and most confusing I had ever lived through. Everything felt different, even though nothing had physically changed. The apartment still looked the same, His toothbrush was still beside mine, and his coat still hung on the hook by the door. But the emotional foundation of everything between us had cracked so deeply that I no longer knew how to stand on it without falling through. We had conversations, long, winding ones that led nowhere. Marcus apologized over and over, but each time he spoke, I heard the same voice that had lied to me with ease for over a year. He would say he loved me, and I would want to believe him, but the voice that once comforted me now carried doubt. I would lie in bed beside him, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing and wondering how I had missed the truth for so long. The lie began to reach into every corner of our relationship. Emotionally, I no longer felt secure. I questioned his words, his choices, and his silences. I wondered if every gesture had been calculated to keep the truth hidden. When he said he wanted a future with me, was it because he loved me, or because he wanted to preserve a false narrative? Sexually, things shifted too. I used to feel close to him in ways that went beyond the physical. Now, even our intimacy felt distant, like we were two actors performing a scene we no longer believed in. He touched me with the same tenderness, but I was no longer the same woman. I was guarded now, unsure of the man lying beside me. My body responded out of habit, but my heart hesitated, unsure if it was safe to open again. Practically, the lie created new problems. We had made plans, serious ones. We had talked about buying a house, starting a family, building a life together. Those conversations had always been framed around our ages, where we were in our lives, how much time we had. Learning that he was 7 years older shifted everything. He had less time for the things we had hoped to do together, and more baggage from a life I did not know as well as I thought I did. He had lived a whole different chapter before meeting me, and he had chosen not to share it. Socially, the impact was complicated. I confided in my best friend first, unsure of how to even begin the story. She listened with wide eyes and an occasional shake of her head. She asked all the questions I had already asked myself. Why would he lie? What was he hiding? How could I ever trust him again? Her advice was cautious. She told me to take my time, to think about what I wanted, and to remember that people make mistakes. She did not excuse what he had done, but she also did not push me to end things right away. She said love is complicated, and trust, once broken, does not always mean the end, it just means the beginning of something harder. My sister, on the other hand, was not so forgiving. She was angry for me. She said that someone who lies about something as fundamental as their age is not someone who deserves a second chance. She reminded me of the times I had doubted him and brushed those doubts aside. She was protective, and her view was simple. If someone lies, they cannot be trusted. Their conflicting views mirrored the war inside me. Part of me wanted to walk away, to reclaim my dignity and my peace. Another part wanted to fight for what we had built, even if it had been built on shaky ground. I still loved Marcus. That had not changed. But the love I felt now came with pain. It no longer felt pure. It felt bruised, like a flower stepped on but not yet dead. Marcus tried to make things right. He cooked dinner every night, left small notes around the apartment, and tried to recreate the warmth we used to share. He planned a weekend away, saying we needed space from our normal lives to reconnect. But nothing felt normal anymore. Every act of kindness reminded me of the deception. Every romantic gesture felt like a bandage over a wound that needed surgery. One night, we sat on the couch in silence, the television playing a show neither of us was watching. I finally asked him, "Do you even know who you are without the lies?" He looked at me, his face heavy with regret, and said he was trying to figure that out. He said that when he lied to me, he was also lying to himself. He had wanted to be someone else, someone better, someone I would fall in love with. But now he realized that building love on a lie only creates distance. I thought about his words long after the conversation ended. I thought about the man I had loved, the man who made me laugh, who held me during hard days, who brought light into my life. I missed that man. But now I had to ask myself if that man had ever truly existed. Or had I loved a version of him he had carefully curated? I began to journal, something I had not done in years. I wrote down my thoughts, my confusion, my sadness. I wrote about the night we met, our first trip together, the way he looked at me when he thought I was not watching. I also wrote about the lies, the anger, the nights I cried while he slept beside me unaware. Seeing the words on the page helped me begin to understand the depth of my hurt and the complexity of my love. Trust, I realized, is not just about believing someone. It is about believing that they are who they say they are. It is about safety. And once it is broken, everything changes. Love might survive a lie, but it does not emerge unchanged. It limps, it stumbles, it questions itself constantly. I asked myself if I could ever truly trust Marcus again. If we had children, would I always wonder what truths he might keep from them? From me. If we grew old together, would this lie always sit between us like a ghost? One night, I looked at him while he was asleep, his features soft in the dim light. I remembered how much I had loved him, how happy I had been. But I also remembered the sharp pain in my chest when I held that license in my hand. I had felt betrayed, small, stupid. And I did not want to feel that way again. I began to see that love is not always enough. It is important, yes. It is beautiful and powerful. But without honesty, love cannot thrive. It cannot breathe. And I deserved a love that was not suffocated by lies. I still had not made a final decision, but the path was becoming clearer. I was beginning to understand that forgiveness and staying are not the same thing. I could forgive Marcus. I could even believe that he loved me. But that did not mean I had to stay. That did not mean I had to keep building a future with someone who had once decided I did not deserve the truth. Some mornings, I woke up feeling strong. Other mornings, I felt lost. But every day brought me closer to myself, to my own truth, to the quiet certainty that my heart deserved honesty more than it needed comfort. I was beginning to accept that walking away from someone you love does not mean you failed. It might just mean you finally chose yourself. The morning I made the decision felt different. There was a quietness in the air that was not empty but full, as if the universe had stepped back and was waiting for me to move forward. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea in my hands, watching the steam rise and curl in front of me like a soft veil. Marcus was still asleep in the other room. The apartment was still filled with all our memories, but they no longer held the same warmth they once did. They felt like echoes from a time that belonged to someone else. I had spent weeks in limbo, trying to weigh love against truth, affection against betrayal. I had gone back and forth in my mind so many times that I had started to question what I even believed in anymore. Every corner of our home reminded me of something sweet, something real, and yet all of it had been shadowed by a single, intentional lie. He had told me he was 28 when he was 35. And somehow, that lie had cracked open every other part of who we were. I had listened to his explanations, his apologies, his pleas. He had not asked me to forget what he did, but he had asked me to understand why. He said he had been afraid. He said he had never felt as deeply for anyone as he felt for me, and he did not want to lose the chance to be with me over something as simple as age. But it was not simple to me. It was never about the number. It was about the decision he made to present a version of himself he thought I would accept, instead of trusting me with the truth from the start. I remembered the day we first met. The smile he gave me across the bookstore aisle. The way he seemed so calm, so grounded, like someone who had figured life out just enough to carry someone else through it. I remembered how his age, 28, had felt like the perfect fit for me at that moment in my life. I wanted someone who had lived a little but was still open to building something new. I believed he was that person. I built dreams on that belief. But the truth unraveled everything. 35 meant more time lived, more stories unshared, more parts of himself I had never known. It meant he had made a choice to lie to me, even before I had become someone important in his life. That lie had been there from the beginning, growing roots under our foundation. And now everything that had grown on top of it felt unstable, no matter how beautiful it looked on the surface. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the soft light of the morning stretch across the city. I thought about the conversations we had after I found out. I thought about how he had cried, how he had held my hands and told me he still wanted the life we had talked about. I believed that he meant it. But I no longer believed that wanting something was enough to make it right. Love, I had learned, is not just about feeling. It is about showing up with honesty, with vulnerability, with truth. It is about trusting someone enough to let them see who you really are, even if that truth feels risky. And he had not done that. He had chosen control over trust. He had chosen illusion over reality. And I could not build a future with someone who did not think I deserved the full truth from the very beginning. When he finally woke up, he found me sitting on the couch, already dressed. I had packed a single suitcase, not out of anger, but out of clarity. He looked at me, his face still soft with sleep, confusion in his eyes as they shifted between my face and the bag at my feet. I am leaving, I said quietly. My voice did not shake, not because I was not hurting, but because I had already cried all my tears. I had already grieved the version of us that I had loved. What remained now was acceptance. He stepped closer, his voice low and broken. He asked me to stay. He said we could rebuild. He said he would do anything to earn back my trust. I believed he meant it. I did not doubt his remorse. But remorse alone could not erase what had been done. I do not hate you, I said. But I no longer trust what we have. And I need to go before I lose more of myself trying to hold onto something that is already broken. He nodded slowly, pain flickering across his face. He did not try to stop me. Maybe he knew it was too late. Maybe he had already seen it in my eyes before I spoke the words. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. I turned around one last time, and I saw the man I had once loved standing in the space we used to call ours. But he looked smaller somehow. Not because he was weak, but because he was no longer holding up the lie that had made him appear larger than life. As I walked down the hallway, I felt a weight lift. It was not the absence of love that made me feel lighter. It was the presence of truth. It was the first step toward something new, something I would build with full honesty, even if it meant starting over alone. In the weeks that followed, I missed him. I missed the version of him I had known. But with every day that passed, I also began to feel more like myself. I remembered who I was before I bent to fit into someone else's story. I reconnected with friends I had pulled away from. I filled my time with things that made me feel strong, grounded, whole. I still thought about him sometimes. I wondered if he had learned something from what happened. I hoped he had. I hoped he would be honest with the next person, if only because he had seen what dishonesty cost him. As for me, I learned something I would carry forward. I learned that love, real love, cannot exist without trust. I learned that even a beautiful connection can be poisoned by a single lie. And I learned that leaving someone does not mean you stopped loving them. Sometimes it just means you finally started loving yourself more. I did not get a perfect ending, but I got something better. I got clarity. I got truth. I got to walk away with my head held high, knowing that I gave my love honestly, and that when it was no longer met with truth, I chose to walk away, not in anger but in strength. And in that strength, I found something I had almost forgotten existed. Peace.